Excuse me. I'd like to check my account balance, please. A 90-year-old black woman in an oversized coat stood at the counter. Silver hair pulled into a neat bun, worn church shoes with scuffed heels. A leather purse from another era clutched in weathered hands. She moved slowly, carefully, the kind of careful that comes when bones ache and the world doesn't wait. The bank manager stopped mid-conversation. Richard Hayes looked her up and down slowly, then smiled with false sympathy. Check your balance? His voice carried across the marble lobby of First National Heritage Bank. Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right place? The community center is 3 blocks down. Alfred Crane looked up from his private consultation. The billionaire real estate developer. $8,000 suit, platinum Rolex, supreme confidence. Watched with immediate amusement. Look at that coat. He stepped closer, his expensive cologne clashing with his condescending smirk. Someone's grandmother wandered away from the nursing home. He shook his head in theatrical concern. Does she even know what year it is? Richard, we can't have confused seniors wandering in here. This is embarrassing. The manager gestured toward the door. Ma'am, I really think someone should come pick you up. Do you have a caregiver we can call? A wealthy customer in the waiting area laughed. Just call her a cab already. She's holding up the line. Laughter rippled through the lobby. Cruel, performative. United against one elderly woman in an oversized coat. No one defended her. Not a single person. But not one of them could have imagined what would happen next. Within minutes, Alfred Crane's $50 million empire would be hanging by a thread, and the entire banking institution would be on its knees. All because of a 90-year-old woman they treated like a punchline. Laura Brown didn't leave. She didn't raise her voice. She stood her ground, just like her late husband Robert had taught her for 67 years of marriage. Sir, I have an account here. Her voice was soft but steady. My husband founded this bank. He passed away 6 months ago. He left me this. She placed a worn card on the counter. An original shareholder certificate. Account number 000001. Issued 1965. Richard Hayes glanced at it dismissively. Ma'am, this card is ancient. It's probably expired. And I seriously doubt. Your husband. Alfred Crane laughed louder now, looking around at the watching customers, playing to his audience. Let me guess. He also left you the deed to the White House and the keys to Fort Knox? The lobby erupted. The wealthy customers loved the show. Laura Brown stood perfectly still in her late husband's coat. The one that still smelled like Old Spice and coffee. The one she wore because she wasn't ready to let go. And she waited, because she knew exactly what would appear on that computer screen when Richard Hayes finally stopped laughing long enough to type in account number 000001. If the story already has you hooked, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. What happens next will shock you. Trust me, you don't want to miss a single moment of this incredible journey. The coat still hung by the door where Robert left it 6 months ago. Laura Brown stood in the hallway of their small brownstone, staring at the familiar olive green fabric like it might disappear if she blinked. The morning light cut through the window, illuminating dust particles that danced around the empty sleeve. She'd promised herself she wouldn't wear it today. Promised herself she'd be strong, professional, put together. The kind of woman who could walk into her late husband's bank and command respect. But her fingers reached for the fabric anyway. The coat swallowed her whole. Robert had been 6'2", broad-shouldered from his army days, and Laura barely cleared 5'4" even in her youth. Now, at 90, she'd shrunk further. The sleeves hung past her hands. The hem draped nearly to her ankles. She looked ridiculous and she knew it. But it smelled like Old Spice and coffee. Like Sunday mornings and slow dances in the kitchen. Like 67 years of marriage condensed into worn cotton fibers. She couldn't let go. Not yet. The wedding photo watched her from the mantel. 1958. Robert in his crisp army uniform, medals gleaming, that crooked smile that made her knees weak even now. Laura in her mother's altered dress, the lace yellowed but beautiful, her young face radiant with hope she didn't know she was allowed to have. A black couple in 1958, believing they could build something that mattered. "I'm going to build something that treats people right, Laura," Robert had whispered on their wedding night. "A place where dignity matters more than dollars. Where people like us, people they tried to keep out, can walk in with their heads high." First National Heritage Bank. Founded 1965. His dream made real through sheer will and 17 rejected loan applications and every penny they'd saved. And now Laura needed to know if that dream was still alive, or if it had died with him. She picked up his old leather briefcase. The one he'd carried for 40 years, scarred and scuffed, held together with hope and stubbornness. Inside, her identification card from 1965, the original shareholder certificate, documents with Robert's signature still fresh enough to make her chest ache. The bus ride took 40 minutes. Laura hadn't driven in 3 years, her hands shook too much, her reflexes too slow. She sat in the back, Robert's coat pooling around her, his briefcase on her lap like a shield. Young people got on and off, barely glancing at the old woman drowning in fabric that didn't fit. Invisible. That's what 90 looked like to the world. Invisible and irrelevant. The bus stopped 2 blocks from the bank. Laura's knees protested as she stood, her worn church shoes, the black ones with the scuffed heels she'd worn to Robert's funeral, touching pavement that Robert himself had walked 1,000 times. And then she saw it. First National Heritage Bank rose before her like a cathedral. Limestone and brass, exactly as Robert had designed it. He'd drawn the plans himself, insisted on every detail. It should feel sacred, Laura. Like people matter when they walk through those doors. She stood on the sidewalk, coat billowing in the October wind, staring at the building that held her husband's fingerprints on every corner, his heartbeat in every stone. The bronze doors gleamed. Through the glass, she could see the marble lobby, the elegant fixtures, the wealthy customers moving with easy confidence. Laura's hands trembled on the briefcase handle. Not from age, from something else. Something that tasted like dread. She took 1 step forward, then another. Her shoes clicked against the stone steps Robert had chosen because they reminded him of the churches that had sheltered them when no one else would. The door was heavy, heavier than she remembered. She pushed with both hands, Robert's coat sleeves sliding back to reveal her weathered wrists, the gold wedding band she'd never removed. The lobby opened before her, marble and brass and cold, cold air. And every eye turned to stare at the old black woman in the oversized coat who looked like she'd wandered in from another century, lost and confused and desperately out of place. Laura gripped the briefcase tighter. Somewhere in this building, this temple Robert built to dignity, someone was about to treat her exactly the way Robert had been treated in 1958. And she would finally know if her husband's dream had survived, or if she was standing in its grave. Alfred Crane emerged from the private banking office like a king surveying his kingdom. 6'1", $5,000 charcoal suit tailored to perfection. Platinum Rolex catching the light with every gesture. His handshake with the senior vice president was firm, confident, the grip of a man who just closed a $50 million commercial loan, the largest in First National Heritage Bank's 60-year history. "Pleasure doing business, Alfred." The vice president's voice carried the reverence reserved for the truly wealthy. "Your empire just got a whole lot bigger." Alfred smiled, the kind of smile that had crushed competitors and built skyscrapers. "Empire's the right word, Thomas. By this time next year, Crane Enterprises will own half the commercial real estate in this city." He turned toward the lobby, assistant trailing behind with a leather portfolio, and that's when he saw her. An old black woman shuffling through the bronze doors. Oversized olive coat, silver hair, shoes that had seen better decades. She moved like every step cost her something, clutching a battered briefcase like it held her life savings, which Alfred thought with immediate amusement, probably did. Maybe $300 and some expired coupons. "Excuse me, ma'am." His voice carried that particular tone. Loud enough for everyone to hear, soft enough to sound concerned. "Are you lost?" Laura didn't respond, didn't even look at him. She moved toward the main counter with painful slowness, each step deliberate, focused. Alfred glanced at his assistant, eyebrows raised in theatrical disbelief. Someone's grandmother wandered in from the street. He didn't bother lowering his voice. This should be entertaining. Across the lobby, bank manager Richard Hayes looked up from his desk. He'd been watching Alfred's exit from the private office, hoping for acknowledgement, desperate for the billionaire's approval. Richard had worked at First National Heritage for 12 years, clawed his way to management, and Alfred Crane represented everything he aspired to be: wealthy, powerful, untouchable. When Richard saw Alfred watching the old woman, something clicked. An opportunity, a chance to prove himself. He crossed the marble floor quickly, his polished shoes clicking with purpose. "Ma'am." Richard's voice dripped with condescension disguised as concern. "Can we help you find somewhere? A community center, perhaps? Or I could call you a cab." Laura stopped at the counter, set down her briefcase with careful precision. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of someone who'd learned that dignity didn't require volume. "I'm here to check my account balance." The lobby seemed to pause, just for a heartbeat. Then Alfred Crane's laughter shattered the silence like breaking glass. "Account balance?" He stepped closer, his cologne expensive and overwhelming, his presence commanding every eye in the room. "Oh, Richard, this is delightful. This is absolutely delightful." He looked around at the watching customers, the frozen tellers, playing to his audience with practiced ease. "Let the poor woman check her Social Security deposit. What is it, sweetheart? $50? Maybe $100 if you're lucky?" Richard's smile widened. The approval he'd been craving from Alfred Crane was finally within reach. "Ma'am, I really don't think I have an account here," Laura said quietly. Her weathered hands rested on the briefcase, perfectly still despite the tremor that lived in her bones. "I'd like to check my balance, please." Alfred moved even closer now, towering over her diminutive frame. "You have an account here, at First National Heritage Bank." He said it slowly, like explaining simple concepts to a child. "The most prestigious financial institution in the city. You're telling me you're a customer?" The lobby had gone completely silent. Every transaction stopped. Every conversation died. A wealthy woman in designer heels whispered to her husband. A young professional with a Bluetooth earpiece paused his call. The tellers stood frozen behind their stations, watching the show unfold. Laura looked up at Alfred Crane. Really looked at him. Took in the expensive suit, the Rolex, the supreme confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his entire life. A man who'd never stood where she was standing, wearing clothes that didn't fit, carrying shoes that betrayed her bank account before she ever opened her mouth. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm a customer." Alfred's grin spread wider. He turned to Richard, to his assistant, to the entire watching lobby. "Did you hear that? She's a customer." His voice rose with each word, filling the cathedral space Robert Brown had designed for dignity. "Richard, please check this woman's account balance. I'm dying to know what fortune she's accumulated." Richard hesitated for just a moment, not from kindness, not from doubt, but from the delicious anticipation of the humiliation to come. "Of course." He gestured toward his computer screen. "Ma'am, I'll need to see some identification." Laura reached into the briefcase with steady hands, pulled out a worn card, placed it on the marble counter between them. Richard picked it up, glanced at it casually, then froze. His smile flickered, just for a second. Something in his eyes changed, confusion maybe, or the first whisper of fear. He looked at the card again, looked at Laura, looked at the card. "Ma'am," he said slowly, his voice suddenly different, quieter. "What exactly is this?" And Laura Brown, standing in her late husband's coat, spoke words that would detonate everything Alfred Crane had built. "That's my shareholder certificate. Original issue. 1965. Account number 000001. Richard Hayes' hand began to shake. And somewhere deep in the bank's computer system, a number was waiting that would change everything. Alfred Crane leaned against the counter, positioned perfectly so the entire lobby could see him, hear him, worship him. He was in his element now, center stage, audience captive, vulnerable target acquired. How much do you think is in there, Richard? His voice boomed across the marble cathedral. $20? 50? He paused for effect, timing perfected through years of boardroom dominance. Maybe she's got a whole $100 saved up from birthday cards. Laughter erupted. Sharp, cruel, echoing off Robert Brown's carefully chosen limestone walls. Laura's hands didn't shake as she slid the card across the counter. The plastic was yellowed with age, the lettering faded but still legible. Account number 000001. Issue date, March 15, 1965. Original shareholder certificate. Richard picked it up like it might contaminate him. Glanced at it for half a second. Didn't really look. Didn't need to. He'd already decided what he'd see. Ma'am, this card is expired. He set it down with dismissive finality. We'll need current identification. Something from this century, preferably. More laughter. A woman in a Chanel suit covered her mouth, shoulders shaking. A hedge fund manager in the waiting area nudged his colleague, both grinning like they'd stumbled onto premium entertainment. It's not expired. Laura's voice remained steady, quiet. The kind of quiet that came from 67 years of marriage to a man who'd taught her that volume didn't equal power. Lifetime membership. Issued to original shareholders when the bank was founded. Alfred's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Original shareholders. He threw his head back, laughter genuine now, delighted. Oh, that's rich. That's absolutely rich. He looked around the lobby, making sure everyone was paying attention. You hear that, folks? She's been a customer since the Stone Age. What was the bank called back then, Richard? First National Dinosaur Trust. The lobby roared. Even the tellers behind the counter smiled, trying to hide it, failing. A young professional with slicked back hair actually applauded. Near the security desk, James Wilson shifted his weight. 63 years old, black, 20 years in security, and he recognized something in the way Laura stood. The straightness of her spine despite the worn shoes. The steadiness of her hands despite her age. His grandmother had stood exactly like that in 1963 when the police came. Like dignity was a choice you made, not something they could take. But James said nothing. Didn't move. Didn't intervene. At the third teller station, Monica Chin felt her stomach twist. 26. Fresh out of business school. Drowning in student loans and desperate to keep this job. She watched the old woman absorb the mockery like body blows, and something in Monica's chest burned with shame. But Monica said nothing either. Looked down at her computer screen. Pretended she was busy. Alfred pushed off the counter, straightened his $5,000 suit, and moved closer to Laura. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to see his face. Close enough to intimidate, to dominate, to make her feel exactly how small she was in his world. Tell you what, sweetheart. His voice shifted to something theatrical, magnanimous. The benevolent billionaire bestowing charity on the undeserving poor. I'm feeling generous today. Just closed the biggest deal of my career, actually. He glanced at Richard. $50 million, Richard. Can you believe it? $50 million. Richard's smile was worshipful. Congratulations, Mr. Crane. So here's what I'll do. Alfred reached for his wallet, Italian leather, probably cost more than Laura's monthly rent. I'll donate $50 for your cab fare home. Get you back to wherever you belong. Richard, take it from my account. He pulled out a $50 bill. Held it out toward Laura like feeding a stray dog. The lobby watched in breathless anticipation. Waiting for her to take it. Waiting for the final humiliation, the grateful acceptance, the confirmation that she was exactly what they decided she was. Laura didn't move. Didn't reach for the money. Didn't even look at it. She stood in Robert's oversized coat, hands folded on her briefcase, and said absolutely nothing. The silence stretched. Uncomfortable now. Alfred's hand hung in the air, the $50 bill suddenly looking less like charity and more like an insult left dangling. Ma'am. Alfred's voice had an edge now. I'm trying to help you here. Still nothing. Laura's eyes remained fixed somewhere in the middle distance, as if Alfred Crane, billionaire, empire builder, the most important man in the room, was simply invisible to her. Richard cleared his throat, sensing the shift, desperate to reclaim Alfred's approval. "Sir, perhaps we should call someone to pick her up?" He looked at Laura with exaggerated sympathy. "She seems confused, disoriented. This happens with elderly people sometimes. They wander into places they don't understand." "Yes." Alfred withdrew the $50, relief flashing across his face. "Yes, that's exactly right. She's confused. Probably has dementia or something." He looked at James Wilson. "Security, can you escort this woman to the waiting area? Make sure she doesn't wander off again." James started forward, hand moving toward Laura's elbow. And that's when Laura Brown finally looked up. Really looked up. Met Alfred Crane's eyes with a gaze that had witnessed Jim Crow and Freedom Riders and 60 Years of Men exactly like him trying to make her disappear. "I'm not confused," she said quietly. "And I'm not leaving until someone checks my account balance." She reached into the briefcase again. This time she pulled out a second document, placed it on the counter next to the first. A letter, handwritten, recent. Richard picked it up automatically, started reading. His face went white. "What?" Alfred stepped closer. "What is it?" Richard's hands trembled. The paper shook visibly. When he spoke, his voice cracked. "Mr. Crane, I think we need to." He looked at Laura, then at the letter, then at Laura again. "I need to call the senior vice president. Right now." "Why?" Alfred laughed, but it sounded different now. Uncertain. "Richard, what the hell does that letter say?" And Laura Brown smiled for the first time since walking through Robert's doors. A small smile, sad and knowing and devastating. "It says," she answered softly, "that my husband built this bank, and when he died 6 months ago, he left me everything." Richard Hayes' face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally calculation. The letter disappeared back into Laura's briefcase. The documents returned to worn leather, and Richard's expression settled into something worse than mockery. Polite dismissal. "Ma'am, if you'll just take a seat in our senior waiting area, someone will help you shortly." His voice was smooth now, professional, the tone of a man who'd decided this problem could be managed by ignoring it. He gestured toward a cluster of chairs near the bathroom hallway, away from the main lobby, away from the important customers, away from Alfred Crane's line of sight. "Someone will help you shortly," meant please go away and maybe you'll forget why you came. Laura looked at the chairs, outdated fabric, positioned in the least desirable corner of Robert's Cathedral, as far from dignity as the building allowed. She looked back at Richard, at Alfred, at the lobby full of people who'd decided she was worth less than the marble they stood on. Then she walked to the chairs. Slowly, carefully, Robert's coat trailing behind her like a cape made of memory. She sat with perfect posture, spine straight despite 90 years of gravity, hands folded on the briefcase in her lap, ankles crossed, the way her mother had taught her in 1936, when presentation was the only armor black women were allowed. And she waited. 15 minutes crawled by like wounded animals. Alfred Crane held court in the center of the lobby. His voice carried, always carrying, always commanding attention. He discussed his new acquisition, a downtown property that would become luxury condos. Talked about profit margins and return on investment. 3 junior executives circled him like planets around the sun, laughing at his jokes, nodding at his wisdom, desperate for his approval. Laura watched. From her exile near the bathroom, she watched everything. A young white professional in a tailored suit approached a teller. Immediate service. Bright smile. "How can I help you today, Mr. Peterson?" First name basis. Respect. Efficiency. An older white couple walked in. Gray hair, expensive casual clothes. The manager, Richard Hayes himself, appeared at their side within seconds. "Mr. and Mrs. Rothstein, wonderful to see you. Please, right this way. We serve people, Laura, not portfolios." Robert's voice echoed in her memory, his hand over hers on their wedding night. Every person who walks through those doors deserves to be seen. Really seen. Not assessed. Not evaluated. Seen. Laura's fingers tightened on the briefcase. Alfred passed by her waiting area, deep in conversation with his assistant about property valuations. Then he stopped, turned, noticed her still sitting there. His face registered theatrical surprise. Still here. His voice boomed across the lobby, pulling every eye back to the old woman in the oversized coat. Richard, he called across the marble expanse. Richard, seriously, call someone. A social worker. Adult Protective Services. Something. This is getting sad. Laughter rippled again. Quieter this time, but still there. Still cruel. Richard looked up from his desk, saw Laura, and his expression flickered with irritation. The problem he'd tried to disappear was still visible. Monica Chun watched from her teller station. The shame that had burned in her chest earlier had grown into something heavier, something that made it hard to breathe. She filled a paper cup with water from the cooler, walked slowly toward the waiting area. Each step felt like wading through concrete. Ma'am. Monica set the water on the small table beside Laura's chair. Couldn't meet her eyes. Couldn't look at her directly. In case you're thirsty. It was such a small gesture. Water. Basic human kindness. The bare minimum. And it was still more than anyone else had offered. Monica turned to leave quickly, retreating to the safety of her station, the complicity of her silence. Thank you, Laura said softly. Monica's shoulders tensed, but she didn't turn around. Didn't acknowledge. Just hurried away like Laura's voice might contaminate her. Near the security desk, James Wilson watched. He'd been watching for 20 minutes now, and with each passing moment, the weight in his chest grew heavier. His grandmother's face kept flashing in his mind. Grandma Josephine, who'd marched in Selma, who'd stood in front of segregated lunch counters with her head high and her hands steady while grown men spit on her. She'd looked exactly like this woman. Exactly. And James was standing here in his security uniform, doing nothing. His hand moved toward his radio, then stopped. What would he say? What could he do? Alfred Crane was the bank's biggest client. Richard Hayes was his supervisor. Speaking up meant unemployment, meant his pension at risk, meant his daughter's college tuition in jeopardy. So James shifted his weight and stayed silent. Laura reached into the briefcase. Her weathered fingers found the photograph she'd placed there this morning. The one she almost didn't bring, the one that hurt too much to look at. Robert Brown at the bank's grand opening. March 15, 1965. Standing in front of these very doors, his hand on the brass handle, his smile wider than the building itself. Behind him, a small crowd of supporters, church members, fellow veterans, neighbors who believed. The photograph was black and white, but Laura remembered the colors. The spring sunshine, the hope. She held the photograph in her lap, studied her husband's face, the pride in his eyes, the dream made real. Monica passed by again, returning to her station. Laura lifted the photograph slightly. Miss, her voice was quiet. Could you look at this for a moment? Monica stopped reluctantly, glanced down at the photograph, saw a black man in a suit from the 1960s, standing in front of a building that looked familiar. That's my husband. Laura's finger traced Robert's face through the protective plastic. He built this place. Monica stared at the photograph, then at Laura, then at the photograph again. Her brain tried to process the information, connect the dots, understand what this old woman was claiming. But the pieces didn't fit, couldn't fit. This woman in the worn shoes and oversized coat couldn't be connected to the bank's founding. It didn't make sense. I don't. Monica's voice trailed off. She looked confused, uncomfortable, desperate to escape. Laura waited for understanding, for recognition, for someone to finally see what she was showing them. But Monica just shook her head slightly. I'm sorry, ma'am. I need to get back to work. She walked away, quickly, relieved, and Laura sat alone in Robert's coat, holding the photograph of the man who'd built a cathedral for dignity. While the people inside it treated her like trash they couldn't quite bring themselves to throw out. The clock on the wall read 10:47 a.m. Richard Hayes picked up his phone. dialed an internal extension. His voice was too quiet for Laura to hear, but his expression was clear. Annoyed, impatient, ready to make this problem disappear permanently. He was calling someone. Someone with authority. Someone who could remove her. Laura's hands remained steady on the briefcase, because she knew something they didn't. Something that had been waiting in the bank's computer system for 6 months, since the day Robert died and the lawyers filed the estate documents. And when they finally typed in account number 000001, everything Alfred Crane had built was going to come crashing down. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs to see what real power looks like. At 11:03 a.m., Laura Brown stood. The movement took effort. Knees protesting, back stiff from sitting too long, every year of her life announcing itself in her bones. But she stood, picked up Robert's briefcase, and walked back toward the counter. Slow, determined, each step deliberate as a declaration of war. Richard Hayes saw her coming. His face transformed from irritation to barely concealed fury. He'd made calls. He'd arranged for removal. And now this stubborn old woman was walking toward him again like she had every right to be here. "Ma'am." His voice cut sharp across the marble. "We've already discussed this. Multiple times. I've asked you to wait. I'm requesting to see my account balance." Laura's voice remained quiet, but something in it had changed. A steel core that hadn't been there before. Or maybe had always been there, just waiting. Standard banking service. Available to all customers. Alfred Crane looked up from his conversation. Delighted. "Oh, she's persistent. I'll give her that." He crossed to the counter. Couldn't resist the entertainment. Most people would have left by now. "She's got spirit, Richard. Senile, but spirited." The lobby laughed on cue. Alfred's audience always ready. Laura reached into the briefcase, pulled out the 1965 ID card again, placed it on the counter with careful precision. The yellowed plastic caught the overhead light. Then she reached in again. This time she withdrew a second card. Heavier stock, embossed lettering, official seal of First National Heritage Bank pressed into the corner. Original shareholder certificate. She placed it beside the first card, aligned them perfectly, pushed them forward with steady fingers. Richard stared at the cards like they were written in a foreign language. His hand hovered over them, reluctant to touch, as if contact might somehow make them real. "Ma'am, I really don't have time for. Please examine the documents, Mr. Hayes." The use of his name stopped him. She'd been listening, paying attention, remembering. While they treated her like a confused child, she'd cataloged every detail. Richard picked up the shareholder certificate, studied it with the expression of a man looking for obvious forgery. The paper was authentic, he could feel that immediately. The seal was real. The signatures looked legitimate. But the information printed on it. His eyes scanned the text. Once, twice. His smirk faded like water evaporating. Name, Laura Elizabeth Brown. Status, original founder's shareholder. Account number, 000001. Issue date, March 15, 1965. Shares, 52% controlling interest in First National Heritage Bank. Richard's finger traced the account number, 000001. The first account ever opened. The founder's account. What does it say? Alfred leaned over the counter trying to see. Is she the Queen of England? Did she discover buried treasure? Richard didn't answer. His brain was moving too fast, trying to process, trying to find the flaw, the explanation, the reason why this couldn't possibly be real. "Ma'am." He looked up at Laura, and his voice had changed. Not respectful yet, but uncertain. "This account number, it can't be right. This would make you. Please check your system, young man." The young man landed like a slap. Richard was 43, successful, powerful. And this old woman had just reduced him to a child being corrected by his elder. His face flushed. Anger and embarrassment and something else, the first whisper of fear. "Fine. The word came out sharp, clipped. Fine. I'll check the system and we can clear up this confusion once and for all. He turned to his computer screen, fingers moving with aggressive precision across the keyboard. Let's see what account 000001 actually contains. Shall we? Alfred moved closer, interested now. What's happening? Richard, what's the problem? No problem, Mr. Crane. Richard's fingers flew across the keys. Just helping this lady understand that whatever card she bought at a flea market isn't. He stopped. His fingers froze mid-keystroke. The lobby continued around them, conversations, transactions, the normal rhythm of banking. But at Richard Hayes' terminal, time had stopped. His face went white. Actually white. Color draining like water from a broken glass. Richard. Alfred's voice held the first edge of concern. What is it? Richard didn't respond. Couldn't respond. His eyes were locked on the screen, scanning information that couldn't be real. Numbers that couldn't exist. A truth that was rewriting everything he thought he knew. Monica Chun glanced over from her station, saw Richard's expression, felt her stomach drop. James Wilson took a step closer, instinct telling him something was about to break. The wealthy customers in the waiting area sensed the shift, the change in atmospheric pressure that precedes a storm. Laura stood perfectly still in Robert's coat, hands folded on the briefcase. Patient. She'd been patient for 6 months, patient for 60 years, patient her entire life. She could be patient for 30 more seconds. Richard's hand trembled as he reached for his mouse. Scrolled down. The screen filled with information, documents, legal filings, ownership records. Oh my God, he whispered. Oh my God. What? Alfred's voice rose, sharp with irritation. Richard, what the hell is on that screen? Richard turned slowly, looked at Laura, really looked at her for the first time. Saw past the worn shoes and oversized coat and 90 years of age. Saw something that terrified him. Mr. Crane, Richard's voice cracked. I think we need to evacuate the lobby. Evacuate? Alfred laughed, but it sounded wrong. Have you lost your mind? Sir. Richard stood up from his desk. His legs visibly shook. This woman? The account? She's... He couldn't finish. Couldn't say it. The words were too big, too devastating. Laura spoke instead. Soft, calm, devastating. I'm Laura Brown. My husband Robert founded this bank 60 years ago. When he died 6 months ago, I inherited his controlling stake. Which makes me, Mr. Hayes, your employer. The silence that followed was absolute. Richard's face went from white to gray. Alfred Crane's smile vanished completely. And every person in the lobby who'd laughed at the old woman in the oversized coat suddenly understood they'd just humiliated the woman who owned everything they were standing on. The screen behind Richard still glowed with the truth. Account 000001. Balance. $847 million. Ownership. 52% of First National Heritage Bank. Laura Brown wasn't a confused elderly woman. She was the majority shareholder. And she just watched them all reveal exactly who they were. Richard Hayes' fingers moved across the keyboard with mechanical precision. Account number 000001. Enter. The screen went white. Loading. The little spinning wheel appeared, rotating endlessly, the universal symbol of waiting. Seconds stretched into small eternities. Alfred leaned against the counter, completely relaxed, enjoying the show's grand finale. Probably overdrawn, he announced to the watching lobby. I'm betting on a bounce check from 1987. Maybe some late fees. Really rack up the drama. You know? Scattered laughter. Nervous now but still there. Richard stared at the loading screen. His jaw was tight. He wanted this over. Wanted the confirmation, the proof, the moment when he could finally call security and have this woman removed with justification. The wheel spun, and spun, and spun. Jesus, Richard, what are you running? Windows 95. Alfred grinned at his own joke. Then the screen loaded. Information flooded the monitor in crisp, official text. Account details. Ownership records. legal documentation, numbers that started making Richard's vision blur. His face changed. Not slowly, not gradually. It happened in the space between heartbeats. Color draining from his cheeks like someone had opened a valve and let his blood pour out. His eyes went wide, pupils dilating in genuine shock. His mouth fell open slightly, jaw slack. He blinked. Once, twice, like his brain was rejecting what his eyes were seeing. His fingers, which had been moving so confidently across the keyboard, froze completely, hovering, paralyzed. The screen glowed with terrible truth. Account 000001. Name, Laura Eloise Brown. Account type, Founders Trust, majority shareholder. Status, active. Controlling interest, 52% of First National Heritage Bank. Portfolio value, $847 million. Additional holdings. File attached. Authorization level, unlimited. Richard's mouth opened. No sound came out. His throat worked, trying to form words, but his brain had disconnected from his vocal cords entirely. Richard. Alfred's voice still held amusement, but a thread of concern was weaving through. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Richard didn't respond. Couldn't respond. His hand trembled as it hovered over the mouse, like touching it again might make the screen explode. Monica Chen, from her teller station, noticed the absolute stillness. The way Richard had turned into a statue. Curiosity pulled her from behind her counter. She moved closer, trying to see what had frozen her manager mid-breath. Her eyes found the screen. She gasped. Actually gasped. A sharp intake of breath that cut through the lobby's murmur like a knife. Her hand flew to her mouth. The water cup she'd been holding dropped, hit the marble floor, water splashing across the polished stone. "Oh my God!" she whispered. "Oh my God!" The gasps, the dropped cup, the sudden wrongness, it pulled attention like gravity. Conversations died mid-sentence. Transactions stopped mid-count. James Wilson left his post by the security desk. Against protocol. Against training. But something was happening, something seismic, and his body moved toward it instinctively. He approached Richard's terminal, looked over Monica's shoulder at the screen. His weathered face went slack. His hand reached out, gripped the edge of the counter for support. "Sweet Jesus," he breathed. The lobby had gone completely quiet now. That special kind of silence that happens when a crowd senses catastrophe but can't yet see it. When the air pressure changes before a tornado. When the ground trembles before the earthquake. Alfred Crane felt it. The shift. The change. The sudden absence of laughter, of mockery, of entertainment. "What?" His voice rose, sharp with irritation and the first cold finger of fear. "What is everyone looking at? Richard, for God's sake, what's on the screen?" He moved around the counter, pushing past Monica, shouldering James aside. His eyes found the monitor, and Alfred Crane's world ended. Not in fire, not in explosions, in simple text, in numbers, in the truth he'd been too arrogant to see coming. His mouth went dry, his expensive cologne suddenly cloying. His $5,000 suit felt like it was suffocating him. That can't. His voice was barely a whisper. That can't be real. Laura stood on the other side of the counter, still wearing Robert's coat, still holding his briefcase, still quiet, still dignified, still the most powerful person in the building. "It's real, Mr. Crane," she said softly. The lobby erupted, not in sound, in movement. Bodies shifting, people standing, necks craning to see what could possibly have made Alfred Crane look like he'd been shot. The young professional with the Bluetooth earpiece moved closer. The wealthy couple Richard had greeted so warmly earlier stood from their chairs. The tellers abandoned their stations. Everyone converging on Richard's terminal. Everyone trying to see. And as they saw, their faces transformed. One by one. Horror spreading like contagion. The old woman in the oversized coat. The one they'd mocked. The one they'd dismissed. The one Alfred Crane had offered $50 for cab fare. She owned the bank. She owned everything. Richard Hayes finally found his voice. Came out strangled, desperate. Mrs. Brown, I had no idea that you were. That I was what, Mr. Hayes? Laura's voice remained soft, but something new entered it. Steel wrapped in silk. Human, worthy of respect, deserving of basic courtesy. Alfred tried to speak. His mouth moved, but nothing came out except a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire. Laura reached into the briefcase one final time, pulled out a sealed envelope, set it on the counter beside the computer screen that had destroyed their world. That, she said quietly, is a letter from my attorney. It outlines several concerns I have about how this institution has been operating since my husband's death. Concerns about lending practices, about who receives preferential treatment, about whose dignity matters and whose doesn't. She looked directly at Alfred Crane. It also includes a full review of all outstanding commercial loans over $10 million. Alfred's face went from white to green. His hand gripped the counter so hard his knuckles cracked. $50 million, Mr. Crane. Laura's voice was gentle, almost kind. That's what you borrowed from my bank this morning. You were so proud, so confident. She paused. Let the silence build. Let the terror bloom. I wonder, she said softly, if you'll be quite so confident when the loan committee meets tomorrow to review whether that money was lent to someone who represents our values. Alfred Crane, billionaire, empire builder, the most powerful man in the room, made a sound like a wounded animal. And Laura Brown, 90 years old, wearing her dead husband's coat, smiled. Not cruel, not victorious, just sad, because she'd hoped, desperately hoped, that Robert's dream had survived. And now she knew it hadn't, which meant she was going to have to burn it all down and build it again. Richard Hayes' mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. His hands trembled violently now, no longer touching the keyboard, as if the computer itself might bite him. Mrs. Brown. The words came out strangled, barely recognizable as human speech. Laura looked at him with the patience of someone who'd spent 90 years waiting for men to catch up. Yes, Mr. Hayes? I apologize. We didn't. His voice cracked, broke, reformed. We had absolutely no idea that you. He couldn't finish. The words were too enormous, too catastrophic. Alfred Crane's patience finally shattered. What's going on? His voice cut through Richard's, stammering like a whip crack. Richard, for the love of God, what is on that screen? Richard couldn't speak, couldn't form words. His brain had short-circuited somewhere between majority shareholder and $847 million. So he did the only thing he could do. He turned the monitor, just slightly, just enough. Alfred leaned in, his expensive cologne mixing with the smell of his own fear sweat. His eyes scanned the screen, top to bottom, reading, processing. The transformation happened in real time. Second 1, amused, still grinning, still expecting the punchline. Second 2, confused, the grin faltering, eyes narrowing, brain trying to make sense of information that didn't fit. Second 3, horrified, complete and total horror, color draining from his face like someone had opened his throat, eyes going wide, mouth falling open, the Rolex on his wrist suddenly feeling like a shackle. That can't be right. His voice was barely a whisper. That's impossible. Richard, this is a mistake. Computer error. Someone hacked the system or... It's quite right, Mr. Crane. Laura's voice cut through his desperate denial like a scalpel through flesh. Calm. Steady. The voice of someone who'd known this moment was coming and had prepared for it through 6 months of grief and 60 years of marriage to a man who'd taught her that dignity was something you claimed, not something you were given. My late husband, Robert Brown, founded this bank in 1965. Each word landed with the weight of absolute truth. I inherited his majority share 6 months ago when he passed. The silence that followed wasn't just absence of sound. It was the death of sound. Every conversation in the lobby stopped mid-sentence. The young professional with his Bluetooth earpiece yanked it out, the voice on the other end suddenly irrelevant. The wealthy couple who'd been discussing their vacation froze, champagne glasses halfway to their lips in the mental image of their lives. The junior executives who'd been orbiting Alfred Crane backed away slowly, instinctively distancing themselves from ground zero. Every transaction froze. Monica Chen's hands stopped counting bills. Another teller's finger hovered over a keyboard key, never pressing down. A customer's check remained suspended in mid-air, never reaching the deposit slot. Every eye in the building turned toward Laura Brown, the old woman in the oversized coat, the widow with the worn shoes and silver hair and quiet voice, the woman they'd mocked, dismissed, patronized, and humiliated, the woman who owned everything they were standing on. Someone's phone slipped from their hand, clattered on marble. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the suffocating silence. Alfred's hand gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white, his breathing shallow. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Mrs. Brown. The words came out hoarse, desperate. Mrs. Brown, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I didn't know who you were. If I had known. If you had known, Mr. Crane, you would have treated me with respect. Laura's voice remained soft, but it carried now. Carried to every corner of Robert's Cathedral. But you didn't know. So you showed me exactly who you are. She looked around the lobby, at every face, every person who'd watched, every person who'd laughed. All of you did. Monica Chen's face crumbled. Tears spilled down her cheeks. James Wilson's shoulders sagged under the weight of his own cowardice. The wealthy customers who'd enjoyed the entertainment suddenly found the marble floor fascinating. Richard Hayes looked like he was going to vomit. And Alfred Crane, billionaire empire builder, the man who'd closed a $50 million loan that morning with absolute confidence, looked like he was watching his entire world collapse in real time. Because he was. Laura reached into Robert's briefcase one more time. Her weathered hands pulled out a leather-bound folder. Official documents, legal papers, things that had been prepared, reviewed, and sealed by attorneys who understood exactly what was about to happen. She set the folder on the counter with deliberate care. That, she said quietly, contains a comprehensive review of this bank's lending practices over the past 6 months. Every loan approved, every loan denied, with particular attention paid to who received immediate approval and who was turned away. She paused. Let them see what was coming. It also contains, her voice dropped even softer, a complete audit of all outstanding commercial loans over $10 million. Alfred made a sound. Not words, just a sound. The sound of a man realizing he'd built his empire on sand. Your $50 million loan, Mr. Crane, was approved this morning at 9:47 a.m. Laura's eyes met his. The loan committee meeting that approved it lasted 12 minutes. 12 minutes to approve $50 million. Her finger traced the edge of the folder. Yesterday, a young black woman applied for a $50,000 small business loan to open a bakery in her neighborhood. She had a business plan, 5 years of financial records, 3 professional references, collateral. Laura's voice hardened for the first time. Her application was denied after a 3-minute review. The reason listed was insufficient community ties. The lobby was so quiet you could hear hearts breaking. She grew up in that neighborhood, Mr. Hayes. Her family has lived there for 4 generations. Richard Hayes' face went gray. Laura opened the folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper, set it on top. This is a letter to the board of directors calling for an emergency meeting. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. She looked around the lobby. Every manager, every loan officer, every person with decision-making authority will be there. Her eyes found Alfred Crane. And you, Mr. Crane, will be there too. Because we're going to discuss whether a man who treats elderly black women like entertainment is the kind of person my husband's bank should be financing. Alfred's legs buckled. He caught himself on the counter, but barely. Mrs. Brown, please. The word please sounded foreign in his mouth, like a language he'd never learned to speak. Please, I have projects depending on that money. I have investors. You have until tomorrow morning to remember what basic human decency looks like. Laura picked up Robert's briefcase, straightened her posture. The oversized coat that had made her look small now looked like armor, like a queen's robes. She turned toward the door. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. No one wanted to be close to her. No one wanted to be seen. They all suddenly wished they could disappear, could rewind time, could take back their laughter. At the door, Laura stopped, turned back. The entire bank held its breath. Robert used to say, her voice carried across the marble he'd chosen, through the space he'd designed for dignity, that a bank is just a building unless the people inside it have souls. She looked at each of them, really looked, saw them completely. Tomorrow morning, we're going to find out if any of you still have yours. Laura Brown pushed through the bronze doors and walked out into the October sunlight. Behind her, Alfred Crane collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. Richard Hayes stared at the screen that had destroyed his career. Monica Chun sobbed openly at her station. James Wilson stood at attention, tears running down his face, finally understanding what his grandmother had tried to teach him. And every single person in First National Heritage Bank knew that when the sun rose tomorrow, everything would be different. The reckoning was coming, and there was nowhere left to hide. Laura Brown didn't leave. Not yet. She stood at the bronze doors, her hand on the handle Robert had chosen because it reminded him of church bells, and she turned back to face the wreckage she'd created. Her voice, when she spoke, was still soft. But now every person in that lobby was listening with the desperate attention of people whose lives depended on her next words. Robert built this bank on a simple principle. She took a step back into the cathedral, into the space her husband had dreamed into existence. Dignity for every customer, regardless of their bank balance or the color of their skin. She looked around the lobby, really looked, at the marble Robert had chosen, Carrara, imported from Italy, because he'd read that Michelangelo used it for the Pietà. At the brass fixtures he'd polished himself during the first year when they couldn't afford a custodian. At the elegant architecture he'd sketched on their kitchen table while Laura made coffee and believed in him. He was denied loans at 17 other banks. Her voice grew stronger with each word, filling the space Robert had built for truth. 17. Because he was black. Because they couldn't see past his skin to his dream. She walked slowly toward the center of the lobby, and the crowd parted before her like she was carrying something sacred. He finally started this bank with a veteran's loan, $15,000, and everything we'd saved from 10 years of marriage. Every penny, every sacrifice. James Wilson's eyes filled with tears. He'd worked here for 20 years. 20 years, and he'd never known. Never asked, never questioned whose vision had created this place. He'd come home every night during construction, Laura continued, her weathered hands gesturing to the walls, the ceiling, the bones of the building, covered in dust, exhausted, but so proud. Her voice cracked slightly, so impossibly proud. She stopped in the exact center of the lobby, the spot where Robert had stood on opening day, March 15, 1965, and promised that this place would be different. He designed this lobby himself. Every detail, every choice. She looked up at the vaulted ceiling, wanted it to feel like a cathedral, sacred, a place where people were treated with reverence. The word reverence echoed off marble walls that had forgotten its meaning. Laura's eyes found Richard Hayes, cowering behind his terminal, wishing he could dissolve into the expensive carpet. He trained every manager personally, Mr. Hayes. Her voice was gentle now, which somehow made it more devastating. Spent hours with each one. Made them promise to see the person, not the portfolio. Richard's face crumpled. His mouth opened but no sound came out. What could he possibly say? What words existed that could undo what he'd done? He made them swear. Laura's voice dropped to barely a whisper, but it carried to every corner. That no one would ever feel in this building the way he'd felt in those other 17 banks. Small, invisible, less than human. A sound escaped Richard's throat. Not quite a sob, not quite a word. Just the sound of a man realizing he'd betrayed something sacred. Laura turned to Alfred Crane. He stood frozen by the counter, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume. His confidence shattered into fragments on the marble floor. "You offered me charity, Mr. Crane." She took a step toward him. He flinched. Actually flinched. $50 for cab fare. Like I was a stray dog you wanted removed from your sight. Another step closer. "You mocked my coat." Her weathered hand reached up, touched the olive green fabric that swallowed her small frame. Her fingers traced the worn collar, the frayed cuff, the places where Robert's body had shaped the cloth through years of wear. This was Robert's. Her voice broke on his name. His army coat. The one he wore when he came home from Korea. The one he wore when we got married because he couldn't afford a suit. Tears spilled down her cheeks now, but her voice remained steady. The one he wore on opening day because he said it reminded him that he'd survived worse than prejudice, worse than hatred, worse than people like you telling him he didn't belong. She held Alfred's gaze. Wouldn't let him look away. "I wear it because it still smells like him. Old Spice and coffee and 67 years of love." Her hand clutched the fabric tighter. "I wear it because I'm not ready to let go. Because 6 months isn't long enough to forget the sound of his voice. The warmth of his hand. The dream he died believing was still alive." The lobby was silent except for the sound of people crying. Monica Chin, James Wilson. Customers who'd laughed an hour ago now understood they'd witnessed something unforgivable. Laura's tears continued falling, but her spine remained straight. He died believing this place was still his cathedral. She looked around at the faces, the shame, the horror, the desperate regret. He died believing that somewhere in this city, there was still a building where dignity mattered more than dollars. She pulled the coat tighter around her small frame. "I came here today wearing his coat, carrying his briefcase, hoping, desperately hoping, that I was right, that Robert's dream had survived him." Her voice grew cold. "Instead, I found you." Alfred Crane made a sound like something dying. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., there will be a board meeting." Laura's hand went to her briefcase, pulled out one more document. A list. Names, dates, numbers. Every loan approved in the past 6 months. Every loan denied. Every decision made. She set the list on the counter. "And we're going to discuss whether this bank deserves to carry Robert Brown's name." The silence that followed was apocalyptic. Richard Hayes stared at the list. His name appeared 17 times. 17 loans approved to wealthy white clients. 12 loans denied to black applicants with stronger credit. Alfred Crane saw his $50 million evaporating like morning fog. And every person in that lobby understood that Laura Brown wasn't just the majority shareholder. She was the judge, the jury, and the executioner of everything they'd built on the grave of her husband's dream. "Mrs. Brown." A voice from the back of the lobby. Quiet. Shaking. It was a young black woman, mid-20s, holding a folder, standing near the door like she'd been about to leave, about to give up. "Yes." Laura turned to her. "My name is Destiny Williams." The young woman's voice trembled but held. I applied for a business loan yesterday. For a bakery. They denied me after 3 minutes." Laura's eyes closed briefly. When they opened, something terrible and beautiful lived in them. "Tomorrow morning," Laura said softly, "you're going to resubmit that application. And this time, people who remember what Robert Brown built this bank for are going to review it." She looked back at Richard Hayes. "Aren't they, Mr. Hayes?" Richard nodded frantically. Yes, Mrs. Brown. Absolutely." Laura walked toward the bronze doors again. This time she pushed through. The October sunlight hit her face. Behind her, Alfred Crane whispered desperately to Richard, "Fix this. I don't care what it costs. Fix this." But Richard Hayes, staring at the screen that showed Laura Brown's 52% controlling interest, knew the truth. There was no fixing this. The reckoning had begun. And everyone who'd laughed at the old woman in the oversized coat was about to learn what real power looked like. Laura Brown stood in the center of the cathedral Robert had built, and her voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade finding bone. I'd like to review the bank's loan portfolio, not a request. Command. Particularly the commercial real estate accounts. Richard Hayes scrambled from behind his terminal, nearly tripping over his own expensive shoes. Yes, Mrs. Brown. Immediately. I'll have everything prepared for. Specifically? Laura continued, her soft voice somehow filling every corner of the vast lobby. I want to see every loan issued to Crane Enterprises. Alfred Crane's face went from gray to white to something beyond white. The color of bone, of ash, of things that used to be alive. Every loan, Mr. Hayes. Laura's weathered hands remained steady on Robert's briefcase. Every payment schedule, every interest rate, every piece of collateral. She turned to face Alfred directly. Mr. Crane, I believe you have $50 million in outstanding loans with us? Is that correct? Alfred's mouth opened, closed. His brain was moving too fast, trying to calculate, trying to find the escape route, the loophole, the way out. Mrs. Brown, I apologize. I sincerely apologize. I didn't know who you were. If I had known. You didn't know I owned the bank. Laura took a step toward him. Despite her age, despite the oversized coat, despite everything that should have made her small, she seemed to grow taller with each word. But you knew I was a human being. That should have been enough. The words landed like physical blows. Alfred actually stepped backward. Laura turned to Richard Hayes, who looked like he was praying for the floor to open and swallow him whole. I'll be scheduling a board meeting, Mr. Hayes. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Her voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. Laura turned toward the exit, walked slowly, carefully, each step deliberate. The worn church shoes with the scuffed heels clicking on marble Robert had chosen. The oversized coat trailing behind her like a royal train. The entire bank watched in absolute silence. No one moved. No one breathed. They were witnessing something they knew they'd carry for the rest of their lives. Monica Chun watched through tear-blurred eyes, knowing she'd failed a test she didn't know she was taking. Richard Hayes stared at his computer screen, watching his career dissolve in real time. Destiny Williams, the young woman with the bakery application, stood straighter, hope flickering in her chest like a candle in the wind. And Alfred Crane stood frozen, feeling his empire crack beneath him, $50 million suddenly feeling like a noose around his neck. At the bronze doors, Laura stopped, turned back one final time. The entire lobby held its breath. Robert used to say, her voice carried across the cathedral he'd built, we're not in the money business. We're in the dignity business. She looked at each of them, saw them completely. I intend to make sure this bank remembers that. Laura Brown pushed through the doors Robert had chosen, stepped into October sunlight, into the world beyond the cathedral. The doors closed behind her with a sound like a judge's gavel. Behind her, Alfred Crane collapsed into a chair. His hands shook, his breathing shallow. His phone was already buzzing. Investors, contractors, partners, all needing answers he didn't have. Richard Hayes stared at the list of loans Laura had left behind. His name, again and again. His decisions, his prejudices, his career ending in black and white. Monica Chun left her station, walked to the bathroom, and couldn't stop the tears from falling. James Wilson stood at attention, tears still streaming, finally understanding what his grandmother had tried to teach him about courage. And on Richard's computer screen, a calendar notification appeared. Emergency board meeting. Tomorrow 9 a.m. Attendance mandatory. Topic: comprehensive review of all institutional practices. Presenter: Laura E. Brown, majority shareholder. Below it, an email from Laura's attorney, sent to every board member, every manager, every loan officer. Subject line: The Reckoning. Alfred Crane pulled out his phone with shaking hands, called his lawyer. His voice came out broken. I need you to find me a way out of $50 million in loans. By tomorrow morning. His lawyer's response was immediate. Alfred? Who holds the loans? First National Heritage Bank. And who's calling them in? The majority shareholder. Laura Brown. A long pause. Then, Alfred, there is no way out. If she wants those loans reviewed, they're reviewed. If she wants them called in, they're called in. She owns 52% of the bank. Alfred's hand tightened on his phone. Then what do I do? Another pause. Longer this time. You pray, Alfred. You get on your knees and you pray that a 90-year-old woman you treated like garbage has more mercy than you deserve. The line went dead. Alfred Crane, billionaire empire builder, the man who'd laughed at an old woman in an oversized coat, put his head in his hands and realized that everything he'd built, every skyscraper, every property, every dollar was hanging by a thread being held by the woman he'd mocked. And tomorrow morning, she was going to decide whether to let him keep it or watch him fall. The cathedral fell silent. Outside, Laura Brown stood on the steps of the bank her husband had built. The October sun warm on her face. Robert's coat wrapped around her like an embrace. She looked up at the building, the limestone, the brass, the architecture born from love and determination and the belief that people deserve dignity. Tomorrow she would fight for Robert's dream. Tomorrow she would demand accountability. Tomorrow, she would make sure that every person who walked through those bronze doors was treated the way Robert had always intended, with reverence, with respect, with the understanding that their humanity mattered more than their bank balance. But today, in this moment, standing in the sunlight wearing her husband's coat, Laura Brown allowed herself to feel what she'd been holding back all morning. Pride. Robert would have been proud. Not of the wealth, not of the power, but of the fact that she'd walked into that building with her head high, endured their mockery with dignity, and reminded them all what his dream had really been about. She pulled the coat tighter, breathed in the faint scent of Old Spice and coffee, and smiled. I did it, Robert, she whispered to the October wind. I stood my ground, just like you taught me. And somewhere, in the space between memory and eternity, Laura could almost hear his voice. That's my girl. That's always been my girl. She walked down the steps, headed toward the bus stop, her worn shoes clicking on pavement. An old woman in an oversized coat who just reminded an entire bank that true power had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with knowing your worth. If this story moved you, if it made you think about how we treat people, if it reminded you that dignity matters more than dollars, please share it. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that real power comes from character, not bank accounts. Let's spread this message far and wide. Drop a comment below telling me what this story meant to you. I read every single one. Thank you for watching, and remember, treat everyone with dignity. You never know who you're really talking to.